I helped a woman with her bag on the bus. My feminist daughter said, "Men like you are dangerous." The bus lurched forward just as the woman lost her balance. It was crowded, the kind of afternoon rush where bodies press too close and the air feels heavy with impatience. People stood shoulder to shoulder, gripping poles, staring at their phones, pretending not to see one another. I was seated near the front, my daughter standing beside me, scrolling on her phone with her headphones half on. The woman stood a few steps away, struggling with a large canvas bag that kept slipping off her shoulder every time the bus jerked. She looked tired. Not dramatic, not helpless, just worn down in the quiet way people are at the end of a long day. When the bag slid again and nearly hit the floor, I stood up without thinking. "Here," I said gently, reaching out. "Let me help you with that." I lifted the bag just enough to steady it and shifted it back onto her shoulder. It was heavy. She nodded in relief, adjusting the strap. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm, grateful, unremarkable. That should have been the end of it. But before I could sit back down, my daughter's voice cut through the bus. Sharp, loud, unmistakable. "Don't touch her." The words snapped heads in our direction. I turned, confused. "What?" She stepped forward, her face tight with anger, her voice rising. "Men like you are dangerous. You don't just grab women in public spaces." The bus seemed to inhale all at once. Every sound dropped away, the hum of the engine, the chatter, even the tapping of phones. I felt dozens of eyes land on me in a single instant. Some curious, some wary, some already judging. The woman I had helped froze. She began, then stopped, suddenly unsure whether speaking would make things worse. "I was helping her," I said, my voice low, steady, though my heart had started to pound. "That's what they always say." My daughter shot back. "You think because you're older it makes it okay? That's how men get away with crossing boundaries. Dangerous." The word echoed in my head as if it had been stamped there. I looked around the bus. People stared openly now. A man near the door frowned. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. Someone shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and my daughter. I had gone from helpful stranger to potential threat in seconds. The woman finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "He didn't do anything wrong." I asked for help. My daughter didn't look at her. She was looking at me. "That doesn't matter," she said. "Women are pressured to say they're fine even when they're not." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Let her drop her bag. Let her fall. You're supposed to mind your space," she replied. "Especially around women. Especially in public." The bus driver cleared his throat loudly, glancing back through the mirror. "Everyone okay back there?" No one answered. The woman shifted away from me, not because she seemed afraid, but because the attention had become unbearable. She moved closer to the door, her shoulders tight, eyes down. I sat back down slowly, my legs suddenly heavy. My daughter crossed her arms, satisfied, as if she had prevented something terrible from happening. I stared straight ahead, my reflection faint in the darkened window. In less than a minute, a simple act of courtesy had been reframed as a warning sign. My intention dismissed. The woman's voice overridden. My character reduced to a label. Dangerous. As the bus rolled on and the tension slowly dissolved into uneasy silence, one thought kept repeating in my mind, louder than the engine beneath us. When did helping someone become something people needed protection from? The bus didn't stop immediately after that. It kept moving, swaying through traffic as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, everything felt suspended, like we were all waiting for some invisible verdict to be delivered. No one spoke to me. That was the strangest part. People didn't confront me. They didn't ask questions. They didn't defend me either. They did something quieter and far more unsettling. They watched. The kind of watching that measures distance, that reassesses safety, that silently recalibrates where someone belongs in the hierarchy of threat. I became aware of my body in a way I hadn't been before. The position of my hands, the angle of my shoulders, the fact that I was sitting very still, as if movement itself might confirm suspicion. Across the aisle, a woman who had been scrolling on her phone earlier now pretended to adjust a bag, though I could see her eyes flick toward me and then away again. A man near the back shook his head slightly, not in support or disapproval, but in discomfort, like someone who wanted no part of whatever this was. The woman I had helped stood near the door now, gripping the pole with one hand and her bag with the other. Her posture had changed. Not fearful, contained. She had become small, careful, invisible. That bothered me more than the accusation. She had been turned into collateral. I glanced at my daughter. She was standing rigidly, chin raised, eyes forward. She looked resolved, certain, as if she had intervened in something dangerous and emerged morally intact. "You embarrassed her," I said quietly, keeping my voice low. She didn't turn to look at me. "I protected her." "You didn't ask her if she needed protection," I replied. "That's the point," she said. "Women shouldn't have to ask." I felt a dull ache settle behind my eyes. I had spent my life teaching my children to help when they could, to notice when someone struggled, to act without expecting praise. Somewhere along the way, that lesson had been replaced with a new one: observe, assess, suspect. The bus finally slowed as it approached the next stop. The doors hissed open. The woman stepped off quickly, not looking back. As she passed me, she hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Thank you for helping." Then she was gone. Those words stayed with me long after the doors closed again. Thank you for helping. They were simple, uncomplicated, human, and yet they had been rendered irrelevant the moment my daughter spoke. The bus pulled away, and conversation slowly resumed in low, awkward fragments. Someone laughed too loudly. A phone rang. Life tried to reassert itself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry at the people staring at me. I understood fear. I understood caution. What unsettled me was how quickly fear had been assigned, how effortlessly a stranger's character could be rewritten based on a single gesture, interpreted through a single lens. I looked down at my hands again. These hands had carried groceries for neighbors, held my children when they cried, gripped hospital rails through long nights. They were not harmless, but they were not dangerous either. They were simply mine. When my daughter finally spoke again, her tone was calmer, almost instructional. "You have to understand," she said. "Intent doesn't matter in situations like that. What matters is impact." "Whose impact?" I asked. She frowned. "Women's." "And what about hers?" I said. "The woman you claim to be protecting." She hesitated, just briefly. "She might not realize." "She realized," I interrupted. "She spoke. You ignored her." My daughter turned toward me then, irritation flashing across her face. "You're missing the bigger picture." "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm seeing it clearly." The bigger picture, as she understood it, had no room for individual voices when they contradicted the narrative. Lived experience was secondary to theory. Consent was overridden by assumption. Context was disposable. That frightened me. Because if a woman's own words could be dismissed for her own supposed good, then protection had begun to look a lot like control, just wearing different clothes. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When we finally got off the bus, the evening air hit my face like a release. People dispersed quickly, each carrying their own version of what had happened. I stood there for a moment, watching the bus pull away. I felt older than I had that morning, not because my body had changed, but because something in the world had. As we walked toward the parking lot, my daughter broke the silence. "I didn't mean to call you out like that," she said. "But men need to be told when they cross lines." "I didn't cross a line," I replied. "You don't get to decide that," she said. I stopped walking and looked at her. "Then who does?" I asked. She didn't answer. We stood there, the space between us filled with words neither of us seemed ready to say. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a bus ride. It was about what happens when suspicion replaces trust as the default, when helping becomes hazardous, when a lifetime of being decent can be undone by a single accusation, spoken loudly enough. As we got into the car, one thought refused to leave me. If being good is no longer enough, what exactly are people supposed to be instead? That night, the silence followed me home. Not the comfortable kind that settles after a long day, but the uneasy kind that presses against your thoughts and refuses to let them rest. I sat at the kitchen table long after my daughter had gone to her room, replaying the scene on the bus again and again, not to defend myself, but to understand how a moment could fracture so quickly. I kept seeing the woman's face. Not frightened, not alarmed, just tired. That detail mattered more than anything else. I had seen that look 1,000 times before, in grocery store lines, on park benches, in hospital corridors. It's the look of someone who has been carrying too much for too long and doesn't have the energy to turn a small struggle into a scene. Helping her hadn't felt heroic. It hadn't even felt intentional. It had felt normal. And now, normal was being reclassified as risky. My daughter came into the kitchen quietly, pouring herself a glass of water. She avoided my eyes at first, then finally spoke. "You're upset." "I'm confused," I replied. "There's a difference." She leaned against the counter. "You have to understand the context women live in." "I do," I said. "What I don't understand is why her context didn't count." She sighed. "Because women are conditioned to minimize their discomfort, and men are now conditioned to assume they're guilty?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "I wasn't trying to shame you," she said. "I was trying to interrupt a pattern." "That wasn't a pattern," I replied. "That was a person. Two people." She frowned. "Patterns are made of people." "Yes," I said. "And when you ignore the person in front of you to fight the pattern, you stop protecting anyone." She shook her head. "You're taking this personally." "How could I not?" I asked. "I was called dangerous in front of strangers." "That word isn't about you," she said quickly. "It's about behavior." "That behavior had a face," I replied. "Mine." She looked away. I realized then that we were speaking two different languages. Hers was built on abstractions, systems, dynamics, probabilities. Mine was built on moments, faces, voices, choices. And the problem wasn't that one was right and the other wrong. The problem was that hers left no room for mine to exist. Later, lying in bed, sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about the word dangerous, how heavy it was, how final, how easily it could stick to someone without evidence, without inquiry, without appeal. I had always believed danger revealed itself through patterns of harm, not through single acts of help. I had believed character was something observed over time, not assigned in an instant. That belief suddenly felt outdated, almost naive. What scared me most wasn't the accusation itself. It was how quickly everyone accepted it. No one asked what happened. No one asked the woman how she felt. No one asked me why I acted. The verdict arrived fully formed. And if that could happen on a bus, in broad daylight, with witnesses, what did that mean for quieter moments? For smaller gestures? For situations without a woman willing to speak up afterward? The next morning, I caught myself hesitating in a way I never had before. At the coffee shop, a woman dropped a stack of napkins near the counter. I noticed it instantly. Instinctively, I leaned forward. Then I stopped. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I wondered how it might look. Who might be watching? What story might be told if I misjudged the moment? Someone else picked them up. I stood there, coffee in hand, feeling something I hadn't expected. Shame. Not for helping, but for considering whether I was allowed to. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about one confrontation with my daughter. It was about a quiet reprogramming that had already begun. A lesson being taught not with laws or rules, but with fear. Don't engage. Don't assist. Don't risk being misunderstood. I understood caution. I respected boundaries. But this was something else entirely. This was a world where the safest man was an invisible one, and I wasn't sure I was willing to become that. That afternoon, my daughter texted me from her room. "We need to talk about this more." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to avoid it, to let time blur the edges, to let the incident become just another story we never quite resolved. But I knew that if I didn't speak now, something would calcify between us. Something that would make future moments even more fragile. "Yes," I finally replied. "We do." As I set my phone down, I felt a mix of resolve and sadness settle in my chest. I wasn't angry with my daughter. I was afraid of the world she was learning to navigate. A world where suspicion had replaced curiosity, where help required justification, and where being good was no longer assumed, but demanded to prove itself again and again. And I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't push back against that, calmly, humanly, without hostility, I wouldn't just lose my voice. I'd lose the part of myself that had always believed helping was a good thing, even when no one was watching. We sat down that evening at the kitchen table, the same place where so many ordinary conversations had happened over the years. Homework discussions, weekend plans, small disagreements that ended in laughter. This time, the air felt heavier, like the table itself had been assigned a role it never asked for. My daughter spoke first. "You have to understand why I reacted," she said. Her tone wasn't sharp now. It was controlled, almost careful. Women are taught to ignore warning signs. I won't be part of that. I nodded slowly. And I won't be part of teaching people that help is a threat. She leaned forward. "That's not what I'm saying. That's what happened," I replied, "whether you meant it or not." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're taking one moment and making it about yourself. I'm taking one moment and asking why the people inside it didn't matter," I said. "Especially the woman you say you were protecting." Her jaw tightened. She could have felt pressured to say it was fine. Or, I said gently, she could have meant what she said. My daughter looked at me, frustration flickering across her face. "You don't get how fear works." "I do," I replied. "I've lived long enough to know it well. but fear that refuses to listen becomes something else. She didn't respond right away. I continued, carefully. You called me dangerous in public. Do you know what that does to someone? She hesitated. It wasn't personal. It was my name, my face, my body standing there, I said. It doesn't get more personal than that. The room went quiet. I didn't think about it like that, she admitted. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think about me at all. You saw a category. She shifted in her chair. Men are a category when it comes to safety, and women are not. I asked, are they not individuals with voices and judgment? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I raised you to be aware, I continued, to notice injustice, to stand up when something feels wrong. I'm proud of that. But awareness without discernment becomes accusation. Her eyes met mine. So what am I supposed to do? Say nothing. No, I said. You ask. You observe. You listen. And sometimes, you trust. She shook her head. Trust is what gets people hurt. And mistrust, I replied, is what makes everyone an enemy. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. You're asking me to unlearn everything. No, I said. I'm asking you to remember something you already knew. She frowned. What? That people are more than symbols, I said, and moments deserve context before judgment. She looked down at the table, tracing a small scratch in the wood with her finger. I don't want to be someone who lets harm slide. Neither do I said. But I also don't want to live in a world where helping is treated like intent to harm. We sat there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I don't think you're a bad person, she said quietly. I know, I replied. But being seen as dangerous, even once, changes how you move through the world. She didn't argue with that. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the conversation hadn't resolved anything cleanly, but it had done something important. It had slowed us down. The certainty she carried had cracked just enough to let doubt in. And doubt, I've learned, isn't weakness. It's the beginning of wisdom. I still believed helping someone was right. She still believed vigilance was necessary. But now, at least, we were finally talking about the space between those two beliefs, the space where real people live. And in that space, I felt the faintest sense of hope that this story wouldn't end with silence, but with understanding earned the hard way. Not through slogans, but through listening. The days after that conversation were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just restrained. My daughter didn't avoid me, but she didn't seek me out either. We moved around each other carefully, like two people sharing a narrow hallway, each waiting for the other to pass first. Polite, cautious, measured. I kept thinking about something she'd said. Men are a category when it comes to safety. It echoed in my head at odd moments, when I washed the car, when I took out the trash, when I stood in line at the pharmacy. I had lived long enough to know that categories are useful for statistics, not for human beings. Yet here I was, feeling myself reduced to one. What unsettled me most was how quickly I began to adjust. At the grocery store, an elderly woman struggled to reach a carton of milk on the top shelf. I noticed her hesitation, the small sigh she let out before stepping back. Instinct kicked in. Then doubt followed. I glanced around. Two people in the aisle. A security camera overhead. No daughter this time. No accusation waiting. Still, my feet didn't move. A younger woman reached past me and grabbed the carton for her. They exchanged smiles. The moment passed. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at nothing. It wasn't fear of consequences that stopped me. It was fear of interpretation. That was new. And it made me angry, not at my daughter, not even at the world, but at myself for allowing a single word to begin rewriting my instincts. Dangerous. I had spent decades trying to be the opposite of that. Careful, respectful, present. And yet, one public accusation had been enough to make me question whether I was allowed to act at all. That night, my wife noticed. "You've been quieter," she said as we sat together on the couch. "I'm thinking," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "About the bus?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I thought so." I hesitated before saying what had been weighing on me. I didn't help someone today. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure I should. Her expression changed. Not angry, not surprised. Concerned. "That's not good," she said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." She reached for my hand. "You've always been someone who helps. That's not something you learned from a book. That's who you are." "I'm starting to wonder if who I am is allowed anymore," I admitted. She squeezed my hand gently. "Allowed by whom?" That question cut through the fog. "I don't know," I said. "Everyone. No one." She shook her head. "I don't recognize that man. The one who waits for permission to be decent." Neither did I. The next afternoon, my daughter and I found ourselves alone in the house. She was sitting at the kitchen counter, typing on her laptop. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there longer than necessary. "I didn't help someone today," I said suddenly. She looked up. "Okay. I wanted to," I continued. "But I didn't. Because I heard your voice in my head." She stiffened slightly. "That wasn't my intention." "I know," I said. "But it was the result." She closed her laptop slowly. "You think I'm teaching you to be afraid. I think the world already is," I replied. "And you're reinforcing it." She frowned. "Fear keeps people safe. Fear also keeps people alone," I said. "And silent." She didn't answer right away. "I'm not asking you to stop caring about safety," I said. "I'm asking you to care about consequences too. The quiet ones. The ones you don't see because they happen inside people." She looked at me, uncertainty flickering across her face. "I don't want you to stop being kind," she said. "Then don't call kindness dangerous," I replied. The words hung between us. That was the first time I saw something shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to matter. She wasn't retreating into certainty this time. She was sitting with discomfort. And discomfort, unlike fear, has the potential to teach. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. The bus ride hadn't just changed how others saw me. It had almost changed how I saw myself. And that was the real danger. Not helping someone and being misunderstood, but stopping yourself from helping at all. I made a decision then, quiet but firm. I would not become invisible to make others comfortable. I would not abandon decency to avoid suspicion. I would not let fear rewrite my character. If someone needed help and I could offer it respectfully, I would. Not recklessly, not intrusively, but humanly. Because a world where good people are afraid to act is not safer. It's colder. And I wasn't ready to live in that kind of world. The decision I made that night didn't feel heroic. It felt necessary. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went for a walk through the neighborhood. The air was cool, the streets quiet, the kind of calm that invites reflection whether you want it or not. As I walked, I paid attention to my body, how tense my shoulders had become, how often I scanned my surroundings before acting, even when there was nothing to fear. That constant self-monitoring was new and exhausting. I passed a bus stop where a few people were waiting. An elderly man struggled to lift a small suitcase onto the bench. No one moved. Not because they were cruel, but because everyone was busy minding themselves, careful not to misstep, careful not to be noticed. I hesitated. That familiar pause crept in again. Then I stepped forward. "Need a hand?" I asked, keeping my distance, my voice calm. He looked up, relieved. "Yes, thank you." I lifted the suitcase and set it beside him. That was it. No drama. No accusation. No alarm bells. Just a nod of gratitude and a quiet return to waiting. As I walked away, something inside me loosened. That small moment reminded me of who I was before fear entered the equation. Before helping required an internal debate. Before kindness felt like a liability. When I got home, my daughter was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered. "You're up early," she said. "I went for a walk," I replied. She nodded, then hesitated. "About the other day. I've been thinking." I waited. "I still believe men need to be careful in public spaces," she said. "But I don't think I handled that well." That was more than I expected. "I wasn't trying to protect you from accountability," she continued. "I was trying to protect someone else." "I know," I said. "But you protected her from something that wasn't happening, and in the process, you created something that was." She frowned. "You mean the attention?" "The fear," I replied. "The way everyone suddenly had permission to see me as a threat." She sat down at the table, quieter now. "I didn't think about what that would do to you." "I don't think people do," I said. "That's the problem." We sat in silence for a moment. "Do you really feel like you can't help people anymore?" she asked. "I felt like I had to ask permission," I said. "From the room. From strangers. From you." Her expression tightened. "That wasn't fair." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." She rubbed her hands together slowly. "I don't want to live in a world where everyone assumes the worst." "Neither do I said. "But that's the world we're building if we're not careful." She looked at me, really looked at me. Not as a symbol, not as a category, but as her father. "I don't think you're dangerous," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But words don't disappear once they're said." She nodded, eyes downcast. "I'm still figuring out where the line is." "So am I said. "But I know this. If we teach people to fear each other by default, we don't make anyone safer. We just make everyone lonelier." That afternoon, we ran errands together. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontations. No tests. Just ordinary life moving forward. And yet, something had shifted. The accusation on the bus no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a warning, a moment that forced me to decide whether I would retreat into invisibility or step forward with intention. I chose intention. Not loud, not reckless, but grounded. I would help when help was needed. I would speak when silence felt wrong. I would listen when listening mattered. And I would refuse to accept a world where decency must justify its existence before it's allowed to act. That night, as I turned off the lights and lay in bed, one thought stayed with me, steady and clear. Being cautious is wise. Being afraid of your own humanity is not. And whatever labels the world was eager to use, I would not let them strip me of the simple belief that helping someone, done with respect and care, was still one of the most human things a person could do. What surprised me most after that conversation wasn't what my daughter said next. It was what she didn't say. She didn't repeat the accusation. She didn't reframe it with softer language. She didn't try to win the argument by changing the terms. Instead, she grew quieter, not withdrawn, not sulking, thoughtful. And that told me something important. For the first time, she wasn't rehearsing a response. She was sitting with the consequences. I noticed it in small ways over the next few days. The pauses before she spoke. The way she watched interactions instead of immediately narrating them. The absence of that familiar urgency to label, to intervene, to correct. It felt unfamiliar and honest. One afternoon, we found ourselves riding the bus again. Not the same route, not the same time, but the same kind of crowd, people pressed together, tired, anonymous, each wrapped in their own small bubble of survival. I took a seat near the middle. My daughter stood nearby, holding the rail. Neither of us mentioned the last bus ride, but it was there between us, unspoken. A few stops in, a woman entered carrying a stroller and 2 bags. She struggled to maneuver down the aisle, apologizing softly as she bumped knees and elbows. No one moved at first. Eyes averted, bodies stiff. I felt that familiar instinct rise. Then the familiar doubt. I glanced at my daughter, not for permission, but out of awareness. She was watching too. Not tense, not braced, just observing. I stood. "Would you like a hand?" I asked, keeping my distance, my voice clear and neutral. The woman looked up, relieved. "Yes, please." I took one of the bags and held it steady while she adjusted the stroller into a space near the door. It took all of 10 seconds. No touching, no urgency. No spectacle. "Thank you," she said. "That helps." I nodded and returned to my seat. The bus moved on. No one stared. No one reacted. No one labeled. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. My daughter didn't say anything right away. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the woman. She stared out the window, thoughtful. A few stops later, she sat down beside me. "That," she said quietly, "felt different." "How?" I asked. "You asked," she replied. "You waited." I nodded. Context matters. She was quiet for a moment. "I think I've been treating every moment like an emergency." "That's exhausting," I said. "For everyone," she added. She leaned back in her seat, eyes still on the window. "I don't want to be the kind of person who assumes harm before it exists." "That's a good place to start," I replied. She didn't argue. That night, as we ate dinner together, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, but because the tension had loosened its grip. There was room again. For jokes. For disagreement without accusation. For silence that didn't feel loaded. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I think fear made me louder than I needed to be. And I think silence almost made me smaller than I should have been," I replied. She smiled faintly. "We both overcorrected." "Yes," I said. "And we both noticed." That felt like progress. I realized then that the most meaningful change wasn't her learning to trust men blindly, or me learning to withdraw politely. It was both of us learning to slow down, to let people speak, to let moments breathe. to let context matter again. The world is loud with warnings, with rules shouted in advance, with assumptions designed to keep everyone safe by keeping everyone distant. But distance has a cost. It turns ordinary kindness into risk. It turns neighbors into strangers. It turns help into hesitation. Watching my daughter begin to question that, not angrily, not defensively, but honestly, gave me something I hadn't expected: hope. Not the naive kind, the earned kind, the kind that understands fear exists for a reason, but refuses to let fear become the only lens through which we see each other. As I went to bed that night, I thought back to the word that started all of this: dangerous. I understood now that the real danger wasn't a man offering help on a bus. It was a world that teaches people to see each other first as threats, and only second, if at all, as human beings. And as long as I had a say in it, I would keep choosing the harder path, the one that risks being misunderstood, the one that insists on dignity, the one that still believes helping someone, when done with respect and care, is not something to apologize for, but something to protect. What stayed with me after that second bus ride wasn't relief. It was awareness. I realized how much effort it now took for simple decency to feel simple again. How many invisible calculations were happening before a single word was spoken or a single step was taken. Not just for me, but for everyone. We had all learned to brace. I noticed it in the grocery store, where people hovered near one another without ever quite meeting eyes. I noticed it in elevators, where silence felt less like courtesy and more like mutual suspicion. I noticed it in myself, in the way I now measured tone and distance with a precision that used to belong only to genuinely risky situations. This wasn't caution anymore. It was conditioning. One afternoon, my daughter and I sat on the back porch, the late sun casting long shadows across the yard. She was quiet, scrolling through her phone, then stopping, rereading something, scrolling back again. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course." "Did you ever feel afraid of women?" she asked. The question surprised me. "Afraid?" I repeated. "No. Careful sometimes. Respectful. But afraid? No." She nodded slowly. "I think I've been afraid of men." I didn't respond right away. Not because I disagreed, but because I wanted to understand what she meant before answering. "Not individually," she continued. "More like collectively. Like danger is always waiting to show itself, and if I don't react fast enough, it's my fault." "That's a heavy way to move through the world," I said. She let out a small laugh. "It is." She looked up at me then. "When I called you dangerous on the bus, I wasn't really talking to you. I was talking to every story I've ever heard." "And did that feel fair?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. It felt loud. And afterward, it felt wrong. That mattered. Not as an apology. As recognition." "I don't want to raise my voice at the wrong people," she said. "But I don't know how to tell the difference sometimes." I leaned back in my chair. "No one does perfectly. That's why we talk. That's why we ask. That's why we listen." She was quiet again, absorbing that. "I think I forgot that asking is an option," she admitted. "Everything feels urgent now. Like if you pause, someone gets hurt." "And sometimes," I said, "people get hurt because no one pauses." That idea seemed to settle into her slowly. Later that evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, rinsing a mug. Through the window, I could see my daughter sitting outside, knees drawn up, staring at nothing in particular. I thought about how close we had come to letting that bus ride define us. One accusation. One word. One moment where fear spoke faster than understanding. It would have been easy to retreat, to become smaller, to adopt invisibility as a form of safety. Many people do. Quietly, convincingly. But something inside me resisted that. Not pride. Not defiance. Conviction. I knew who I was. I knew why I helped. I knew the difference between intrusion and assistance, between entitlement and care. And I knew that if I abandoned those distinctions because the world had become louder and more suspicious, I would lose something essential. Not my reputation. My integrity. That night, my daughter knocked on my door before going to bed. "I don't think men like you are dangerous," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But I needed to say it," she added. "I'm glad you did." She hesitated. "I'm still figuring things out." "So am I said. She smiled faintly, then walked away. As I lay in bed, the house quiet around me, I thought about how rarely conflicts like this actually end. They don't wrap themselves up neatly. They evolve. They teach. They leave marks. But if you're paying attention, they also leave openings. Openings to choose differently next time. To speak instead of assume. To help without fear, or at least without surrendering to it. The world may be learning to see danger everywhere, but I was learning something else. That courage, sometimes, isn't about stepping in. It's about refusing to step back from who you are, even when the world tells you it might be safer if you did. The real turning point came when I least expected it. A week later, my daughter asked me to run errands with her. No agenda. No serious tone. Just a casual invitation that felt, in its own quiet way, like a bridge being offered. We drove across town, talking about ordinary things. The price of gas, a neighbor who had planted the wrong kind of tree, a movie she'd watched and half-liked. It felt almost like old times. Almost. We stopped at a small market near the corner of a busy street. As we walked toward the entrance, I noticed an older woman ahead of us struggling with a shopping cart that had jammed against the curb. One wheel refused to lift, the metal frame rattling loudly as she tried to force it. I slowed my pace instinctively. So did my daughter. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to hold its breath with us. I could feel the old calculation rising again, the mental checklist of distance, posture, tone. I was aware of my daughter beside me, aware of the woman's frustration, aware of how this might look from the outside. Then my daughter spoke. "Do you want help?" she asked the woman. The woman looked up, relieved. "Yes, please. This thing won't move." My daughter glanced at me, not nervously, not for permission, but with something like clarity. "Can you grab the front while I lift the back?" she asked. I nodded. We stepped forward together. I held the cart steady while my daughter lifted and adjusted the wheel. It took less than a minute. The cart rolled smoothly onto the sidewalk. "Oh, thank you," the woman said, smiling at both of us. I was about to give up. "You're welcome," my daughter replied. We walked on. Neither of us said anything for a few steps. Then she laughed quietly. That felt normal. "Yes," I said. "It did." She exhaled. "I think I've been living like every interaction is a test I might fail." "That's a hard way to live," I replied. She nodded. I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on myself, and on everyone else. We reached the car and paused before getting in. "When you helped that woman on the bus," she said slowly, "I thought I was stopping something bad from happening. But I never asked myself if something good was already happening. That sentence landed with unexpected weight. Good things don't always announce themselves, I said. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're clumsy. But they're still good. She leaned against the car door, thoughtful. I don't want to be someone who breaks good things by accident. I don't think you are, I replied. I think you're learning how not to. She smiled at that. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the bus ride. Ease. Not because the world had become safer. Not because every risk had disappeared. But because we were finally distinguishing between vigilance and suspicion, between awareness and accusation. That mattered. I realized then that the reappearance of trust doesn't come from grand apologies or dramatic reversals. It comes from shared moments that quietly contradict old fears. From doing the thing together and discovering that the world doesn't collapse when you choose humanity first. When we got home, my daughter carried the groceries inside without rushing. At the door, she turned to me. "Thank you for not shutting down," she said. "A lot of people would have." I nodded. "Thank you for being willing to look again." That night, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I understood something clearly. The story that began on a bus didn't end there. It had taken a detour through fear, accusation, and doubt, but it was finding its way back to something simpler, something older, something more human. The belief that helping someone doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you present. And presence, when shared instead of judged, still has the power to soften even the hardest narratives we inherit. I still think about that bus ride. Not because it was dramatic, but because of how quickly it revealed something fragile about the world we're living in. How thin the line has become between care and suspicion. How easily a single word can redraw the boundaries of who you're allowed to be. Dangerous. I've carried that word with me longer than I expected. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. A reminder of how fast fear moves when it no longer waits for facts. How easily good intentions are treated as liabilities when trust is no longer the starting point. What changed me most wasn't being accused. It was realizing how close I came to changing myself in response. I almost learned to disappear. I almost learned to keep my hands to myself, not out of respect, but out of fear. To look away when someone struggled. To let kindness die quietly so it wouldn't draw attention. That kind of self-erasure doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. It feels responsible. It feels modern. It feels like adaptation. But it's not. It's surrender. I didn't help that woman on the bus because I wanted to be seen as good. I helped her because in that moment, it was obvious that she needed help and I could offer it without harm. That instinct wasn't taught by ideology. It was shaped by years of being human among other humans. And I refuse to believe that instinct is something to be ashamed of. My daughter learned something too. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But honestly. She learned that fear, when left unchecked, doesn't just protect people. It isolates them. That vigilance without listening turns into accusation. That speaking for someone who never asked you to can erase them just as effectively as ignoring them. She didn't abandon her concern for safety. She learned how to slow it down. And I learned that silence, when it comes from fear of being misunderstood, slowly teaches you to doubt your own character. It makes you smaller without ever announcing that it's happening. I won't let that happen. I'll still ask before helping. I'll still respect boundaries. I'll still be careful with my presence in public spaces. But I will not assume guilt simply because I exist. I will not treat my humanity as a risk factor. And I will not accept a world where decency must justify itself before it's allowed to act. What that bus ride showed me is this: the real danger isn't men who help respectfully, or women who stay alert. The real danger is when we stop seeing each other as individuals and start seeing only categories. When fear becomes faster than curiosity. When labels arrive before listening. Because once that happens, no one is safe. Not from harm, but from each other. I'm still the same man I was before that day. I still believe in helping when help is needed. I still believe that most people, most of the time, are just trying to get through the day without making it harder for anyone else. And I still believe that a world where people are afraid to help is not a safer world. It's a colder one. So let me ask you something, honestly, without slogans or sides. Have you ever tried to do something kind, only to be treated like your intentions didn't matter at all? And when that happened, did you shrink back, or did you find a way to stay human anyway? I'd really like to hear your thoughts.